All right, this is going to be the first PowerPoint lecture for Chapter 10. The title of this PowerPoint lecture is American History, Unit 5, Lecture 1, The Road to the Civil War, Part 1. So, background. So, some things that we've talked about leading up to Chapter 10 at this point, and just in American history in general. The longer-term issues or the longer-term questions that have not really been settled yet is what to do about slavery. And then obviously slavery was wanted in the South, but people in the North wanted to abolish slavery. Also, we have this ongoing battle between states' rights and the federal government. Okay, and we'll go into more detail here about that in a little bit. And then we have this overarching theme of sectionalism, which we've talked about in chapters 8, 9, and then obviously in 10. And these are questions and issues that have divided the North and South up until this point in U.S. history. All right, so questions of slavery that have troubled America since before the Constitution. If you remember and dig back in your memory, we did talk about the Northwest Ordinance. Okay, and if you remember, the Northwest Ordinance was the Northwest, took place in the Northwest Territory, which was north and west of Virginia. And in that new territory, in the colonies, they outlawed slavery. The 3/5 Compromise was a compromise that was put into the Constitution, and then along with that, we have the Slave Trade Compromise, which would outlaw slavery, outlaw the slave trade to and from the United States. And then later on, we talked about the Missouri Compromise, or the Compromise of 1820, with that imaginary line, and then Missouri being added into the Union and as a slave state in Maine. If you need to go back, I would advise you to go back and look at each one of those bullet points if you cannot remember specifics, because it will help you moving forward. So, positions on slavery at this time. So, people in the United States technically had probably three positions on how they viewed slavery. They were either pro-slavery, they wanted slavery, and those people usually lived in the South, obviously. People were against slavery, or they were anti-slavery, and those people obviously lived in the North. And then you have a small population where they were anti-expansion of slavery. So they did not want to see slavery expanded into the new territory that the United States had acquired from the Mexican-American War. So, states' rights versus federal powers. We've talked about a little bit about this leading up to this chapter, but if we talk about federalism in the Constitution, so what is federalism? So, federalism is a system in which federal, state, and local government share power. And you probably talked a little bit about this with in your civics classes when talking about enumerated powers, concurrent powers, and reserved powers. Okay. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution states that all powers that are not given to the federal government by the Constitution are then reserved to the states or to the people. A few things that we talked about. Nullification. So, do states have the right to nullify laws that they believe violate the rights of the people? When was a time that this happened? Well, we know that the Kentucky and Virginia Resolution, the states of Kentucky and Virginia, they nullified or canceled the Sedition Act and the Alien Act, if you remember those. Okay. Also, the tariff crisis of 1828. The state of California, or the state of South Carolina, did not like the tariffs that were being placed upon them, and they said that those were unconstitutional. So the question is, could a law nullify slavery laws? Okay, and people or states are going to struggle with what they think is their right versus what the federal government thinks that it can do. Sectionalism, we've been talking a lot about sectionalism. the North and the South have been growing differently, have been growing apart. There's different outlooks in each section on culture, on their society, and especially on economics. This map here to the right shows more so on economics, or on the industry and agriculture, and how different each section of the country is. And you can look here closely and see, obviously, textiles and other manufacturing things take place in the north. However, there are some in the south, but only in the bigger cities around Raleigh, around Atlanta, Georgia. And that's pretty much it. You can see the differences in agriculture, where cotton is grown in the green, where the corn and the wheat is grown in the yellow, where the sugar is grown in the pink, blue is the rice, and then the brown is the tobacco, where those tobacco pockets were. And then you also see where the slave revolts or the slave rebellions have taken place, obviously in this mostly in the South, with the orange dots representing those. Sectionalism, once again, the North, the northern economy is based upon industry and business and factories. They also rely on immigrant labor. There are very few slaves in the North. There are farms, however, they're very small. They're not the large plantations. They are pro-tariffs or pro-taxes on exports and imports because they make money off of it. They have a moral opposition to slavery, and then they have an economic opposition to slavery as well. South, agricultural economy, slave labor. 4 million slaves are living in the South before the Civil War. Large plantations. They are anti-tariffs or taxes on imports and exports. They are pro-slavery, and they have their arguments. And people that speak about this in public are actually called fire eaters, and they have an economic dependence on slavery. We talked about this. The red line represents the Missouri Compromise line. At this point, we have not organized or not made or created any new states in the yellow mustard colored areas. Obviously, we have received that land or got that land, whether it was by Mexico or the Louisiana Purchase. It's just we haven't really made those. We haven't organized that, or those haven't been states yet. So expansion leads to conflict. Remember, the Mexican secession includes territory both above and below this Missouri Compromise line. So the big question is, will slavery be allowed in these new lands? Okay. The Wilmot Proviso was a document in 1846 in where it attempted to ban slavery in the territory acquired from Mexico. It was approved in the House of Representatives, but ultimately was not passed in the Senate. Southern states did not like this. If you go back to that last map that I just showed you, the issue with the Missouri Compromise is that imaginary red line cuts California, the state of California, in half. So the problem is how are they going to deal with this new territory that has been acquired from Mexico, and then who's going to be a slave state and who's going to be a free state? So this kind of leads into what I just alluded to. California will become established in 1848 with gold. This leads to the 49ers rush to territory, swelling the California population overnight. By 1850, California is large enough to become a state, and the big debate will be whether or not it will be a free or a slave state, because that imaginary Missouri Compromise line cuts the state of California in half. A compromise will be reached, but America has begun down the road to war.